Yo, so here's the thing. Ever had one of those ideas that sounds absolutely killer in your head? Like it's straight up the plot of some feel-good movie? That was us, thinking a weekend away in the wilderness was gonna be the adventure of a lifetime. Me, my girl Vivian, and our friends, let's call them Mike, Sarah, and Tyler, were all set for this trip into the heart of Coconino National Forest, northern Arizona. Picture this, a cabin so secluded, you'd swear we were dropping off the map, surrounded by nothing but the wild. It was supposed to be our little slice of paradise, a break from the grind, you know? We were a mixed bag of nuts, all coming from different walks of life, but bound by that unbreakable bond of wanting to escape the city's relentless pace. Vivian, with her camera always at the ready, hoping to capture those raw, unfiltered moments of life. Mike, the joker, always with a story that had us rolling. Sarah, who could cook up a storm with nothing but a campfire and some basic ingredients. And Tyler, our very own Bear Grylls, always prepared for the worst. Then there's me, just a regular dude who loves the sound of crackling firewood and the smell of pine in the air. The drive up there was half the fun. Our playlist was a mix of classic rock and the latest hits, the perfect soundtrack for our road trip. We talked about everything and nothing, from alien conspiracies to who'd win in a fight between a grizzly and a shark. If, water wasn't an issue. By the time we turned off onto that barely there dirt road leading to our weekend home, we were hyped. Man, pulling up to the cabin, it was like something out of a magazine. Rustic, sure, but with that charm, you just can't fake. Nestled by a lake that mirrored the sky so perfectly, it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Surrounded by trees that stood tall and proud, guardians of the secrets only the wild knew. It was more beautiful than we'd imagined, a true testament to nature's artistry. Unpacking was a blur of excitement. We were like kids on Christmas morning, each discovery more thrilling than the last. The cabin, while boasting of solitude, didn't skimp on comfort. Cozy bedrooms that whispered promises of restful sleep, a living area that begged for nights of laughter and stories, and a kitchen that Sarah claimed faster than a squirrel on nuts. But it was the note from the cabin owner, left on the rustic oak dining table, that gave us our first pause. "Keep the doors locked and the lights off after 10, it read. "Otherwise you might get unwanted attention." We shared a look, a mix of amusement and a tiny niggling sense of unease. Unwanted attention. In the middle of nowhere? We joked about it being a ploy to save on electricity, or maybe a local hermit who wasn't too keen on visitors. Little did we know, that note was the first sign that our weekend getaway was going to be anything but ordinary. We shrugged it off, too caught up in the beauty of our surroundings and the promise of a weekend away from it all. Night fell, and with it came the true magic of the forest. A canopy of stars, a silence so profound you could hear your own heartbeat, and the feeling of being part of something larger than life itself. We gathered around the fire, the warmth and the flickering light, a stark contrast to the cool, dark expanse around us. There was a sense of peace, of being exactly where we were meant to be. But as the hours slipped by, that sense of peace began to fray around the edges, worn thin by the eerie chorus of the night. It was easy to laugh off at first, the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, just part of the night's melody. But as the fire died down and we made our way inside, the isolation of our cabin felt less like a haven and more like a stage for something we hadn't anticipated. Little did we know, our adventure was just beginning, and it was about to take a turn into the realms of the unexplained and the unnerving. Man, if I could go back to the moment we all laughed off that note, I swear I'd slap some sense into us. There was a reason for that warning, a damn good one, but there we were, thinking we were too smart, too city slick to fall for old forest tales. So we settled in, right? The cabin became our little kingdom, surrounded by an empire of trees and silence. It was eerie how quiet it could get when the laughter faded. You don't notice it in the city, but out there, silence has weight, like it's alive. That first night we stayed up late, trading stories by the fireplace. Tyler was on a roll, telling us about this time he got lost on a solo hike and convinced himself a mountain lion was stalking him. Turns out it was just his own echo. We cracked up thinking, yeah, nature's spooky when you're not used to it. But it was all good fun, nothing serious. The more we joked, the easier it was to ignore the unease that crept in with the shadows. Morning brought relief, sunlight slicing through the dread of nighttime. We ventured out, exploring the lake and the woods, feeling like explorers in a land untouched by time. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us, that note's warning echoed in my mind. Keep the doors locked and the lights off after 10. Why? What was out there in the dark? Night 2 and our confidence had returned. The wilderness wasn't going to get the better of us. We were modern adventurers, armed with smartphones and LED flashlights. But there's something about the forest at night. Something ancient that doesn't care about the latest tech. It's primal, and it demands respect. We were sitting around the fire, the darkness pressing in on us, when we first felt it, like eyes were watching us from just beyond the light. Sarah joked it was the hermit from the note, coming to tell us to keep it down. But her laugh was a bit too high, too forced. We all felt it, this sense of being on display, but for who or what, we couldn't say. The fire crackled, a comforting yet fleeting barrier against the night. We'd followed the note's instructions, more out of curiosity than belief, locking the doors and dimming the lights as the clock neared 10. That's when the forest's symphony reached a crescendo, a chorus of night sounds that was both beautiful and unnerving. It wasn't just the isolation or the darkness that got to us. It was the sudden drop in temperature, the way our breaths turned to mist, and the feeling that the night was alive. Whispers between the trees, rustling leaves not quite in rhythm with the wind, and far-off sounds that didn't belong to any animal we knew. We decided to call it an early night, a tacit agreement that maybe, just maybe, the owner's warning had merit. Lying in bed, listening to the silence, that's when it truly hit me. The forest wasn't just around us, it was pressing against us. A living, breathing entity with eyes that watched and waited. For what, I couldn't say. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that we'd invited something in with our laughter and our firelight. And man, I was right. Nothing could have prepared us for what came next. The warning was more than just words. It was a prelude to a nightmare we were all too blind to see coming. All right, so there we were, thinking we had this whole wilderness thing in the bag, laughing off eerie vibes like we were immune to the forest's ancient whispers. But let me tell you, nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepped us for what went down that third night. We were all tucked in, cozy inside our cabin fortress, believing we'd outsmarted whatever was supposed to be scary about the woods. That's when the silence of the night got shattered. It started subtle, just a slight tapping like someone gently knocking on wood. At first I thought it was just the cabin settling, old wood groaning and all that jazz. But nah, this was different. This was intentional. The tapping grew into knocking, steady and persistent, echoing through the cabin like a heartbeat. Hello? Hey, I'm lost. Can you help me? The voice, man, it was chilling. Sounded human enough, but there was this off vibe to it, like when you hear your voice on a recording and it just doesn't sound quite right. Vivian's grip on my arm could have left bruises. She was whispering, "Don't answer it, please." Her eyes were wide, reflecting a fear I hadn't seen in her before. It was contagious, that fear, creeping under my skin, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We stayed silent, a collective decision without words. But the knocking, it just kept on, persistent. Then it changed tactics. Our names, in voices we knew, Mike's, Sarah's, Tyler's, begging us to open the door, to help them. It was a sick mimicry, like a parrot that had overheard too much. How did it know? How could it throw our own voices back at us with such precision? The atmosphere was electric, charged with a primal fear that rooted us to the spot. Our little cabin, once a haven, felt like a trap, with us as the sitting ducks. Then, silence. It was abrupt, the kind of quiet that screams danger. We waited, hardly daring to breathe, expecting, well, I don't know what. Something. Anything. But nothing happened. No more knocks, no more voices. Just the wind whispering through the trees outside, as if nature itself was holding its breath. We didn't sleep that night, how could we? Every creak and groan of the cabin set us on edge, had us staring wide-eyed at the doors and windows, expecting them to burst open at any moment. But dawn came, and with it, a deceptive peace. The sun's rays, filtering through the trees, felt like the world's best liar, promising safety in its warmth. That day was a blur of tension. We were all on edge, jumping at shadows, second-guessing the rustle of leaves. The forest, once a place of beauty, now felt like a vast, hostile entity, watching us, toying with us. We debated leaving, just packing up and getting the hell out of Dodge. But curiosity, that damn human flaw, had us in its grip. We wanted to know, needed to understand what was happening. Plus, leaving felt like admitting defeat, and we weren't ready to give in. Not yet. So we stayed, bolstering our defenses, convincing ourselves we could handle whatever this was. Man, were we wrong. That night, everything we thought we knew about fear got turned inside out. The real encounter hadn't even begun. I'm telling you, nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared us for the fallout of that night. It was like stepping into a scene from some horror flick, except there were no cameras, no directors yelling "cut," just raw, unfiltered terror that clung to us like a second skin. When morning light finally dared to creep through the windows, painting our haggard faces with strokes of gold and pale blue, it felt like a lie. The peace it promised was hollow, mocking us with its serene glow. The aftermath of the night lay heavy in the air, a tangible weight on our chests. Our friends, Mike, Sarah, Tyler, they were gone. Vanished without a trace, leaving behind an eerie silence that swallowed our attempts at rational explanations. Vivian and I, we moved like zombies, our actions mechanical, driven by a primal need to escape, to put as much distance between us and that cabin as possible. Packing was a frenzied blur, our hands shaking, every shadow making us flinch. The wilderness, once a breathtaking canvas of nature's majesty, now felt like a malevolent force, watching us with unseen eyes, whispering threats with every rustle of leaves. We didn't even bother with breakfast. Food was the last thing on our minds. Our only thought was to get out, to find some semblance of safety away from the oppressive atmosphere of the forest. The car ride back was a journey through a tunnel of fear, each mile putting distance between us and the nightmare, but doing nothing to ease the terror that clung to us. Reaching civilization felt surreal, like stepping into another world, one where the sun shone brighter, and the air didn't weigh heavy with unspoken dread. But even as we melded back into the hustle and bustle of human life, the shadow of that night lingered, a constant presence at the back of our minds. Reporting our experience to the local authorities was like narrating a bad dream. Their skeptical looks and not-so-subtle hints at our mental state added a layer of frustration to our fear. Animals, they said, dismissing our story with logical explanations that felt like insults to our raw nerves. But we knew what we had heard, what we had felt. It was no animal. It was something else, something that defied explanation. The cabin, when we dared to return with the authorities, bore no signs of the terror that had unfolded. No signs of struggle, no traces of our friends. Just silence, a haunting, oppressive silence that seemed to mock our loss, our fear. It was as if the forest had swallowed every piece of evidence, leaving behind only questions with no answers. Vivian and I, we clung to each other, finding solace in the shared nightmare that had bound us together in a way nothing else could. The drive home was quiet, a silent agreement that some experiences were too raw, too painful to put into words. Settling back into normalcy was a joke. Every shadow whispered threats, every creak of our apartment a reminder of that night. Sleep became a battleground, our dreams invaded by shadows and unseen terrors. Our friends' absence was a gaping hole in our lives, their laughter and warmth reduced to memories tainted by fear. We moved eventually, seeking solace in the arid embrace of the desert, as far from the treacherous shadows of the forest as we could get. But even there, the nightmare followed, a specter that refused to be left behind. Nights were the worst, the silence of the desert mocking us with echoes of that night, whispers of voices that should have been long silenced. Surviving. That's what we were doing. Surviving, but not living. The forest, that damned entity, had taken more than our friends. It had taken a piece of us, leaving behind a void filled with fear, with unanswerable questions. What had happened to our friends? What had spoken with their voices that night? Questions that haunted us, that followed us even as we tried to rebuild our lives in the barren safety of the desert. But the peace we sought was elusive, a mirage that danced just out of reach. Because sometimes, late at night, when the world held its breath, I could hear them. My friends, calling out to me, their voices carried on the wind, whispering through the sands. Vivian heard them too. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she clung to me during those long, terror-filled nights. We were marked, touched by something beyond understanding, and no amount of distance seemed to matter. The entity, that malicious presence in the forest, it had claimed us in a way. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting, just biding its time. So here's my piece of advice. If you ever find yourself in the wilderness and you hear something knocking, something calling out to you in the dead of night, don't answer. Just don't. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And some things, once awakened, never truly go back to sleep. So here we are, right? Living in this desert, miles and miles from the nearest whisper of a forest. You'd think we'd feel safe, that the endless stretch of sand and scorching sun would cleanse us of the shadows that lingered in our minds. But nah, safety's a tricky thing, elusive, like smoke slipping through your fingers. The thing about trauma, it sticks to you, clings to your bones, and whispers to you in the dead of night. Vivian and I, we've built a life here, amidst the cacti and the blistering heat. Got married even. Thought it might help, turn a new page. But the past, it's got this grip, cold and unyielding. Our friends, Mike, Sarah, Tyler, they're like ghosts, haunting the edges of our reality. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I swear I can hear their laughter, see their smiles flicker in the corner of my eye. It's comforting, until it's not, until the memories twist into reminders of that night, of what we lost, of what was taken from us. Nights are the hardest. The desert, it's silent in a way that's too reminiscent of those nights in the cabin. And in that silence I hear them. My friends calling out to me, their voices carried on the wind that rustles through the dry brush. It's impossible, I know. We're hundreds of miles from where it happened, from that forest that changed everything. But the logic doesn't silence their voices, doesn't stop me from sitting up at night, straining to hear, to understand. Vivian hears them too. I see it in the way she tenses up, the way her eyes dart to the windows, searching the darkness for something, anything. We don't talk about it much. What's there to say? It's a shared nightmare that we can't wake up from, a wound that refuses to heal. And here's the kicker, the part that'll really mess with your head. Sometimes I wonder, wonder if it's really them, if there's some part of my friends that's still out there, trying to reach out to us. It's a dangerous path, that line of thinking. Leads to dark places, to questions better left unasked. Because if it is them, what does that mean? What does it say about what happened to them? About what's still out there in the forest? I've gone back to the notes, the warnings left by the cabin owner. Keep the doors locked and the lights off after 10, he said. A simple instruction, meant to protect us from something he knew was lurking in those woods. Something ancient, something malevolent. We didn't listen, and we paid the price. But the true cost, it's more than just the loss of our friends. It's the peace of mind we'll never have, the security we'll never feel again. So if you're out there thinking about heading into the wilderness, chasing adventure or solitude or whatever, remember this. Respect the warnings, the stories, the local legends. There's truth hidden in those tales. Lessons learned in blood and terror. Don't make the same mistake we did. Don't invite something into your life that you can't ever get rid of. And if, God forbid, you find yourself hearing knocks in the night, voices calling out to you from the shadows, remember our story. Remember what happened to us, to our friends. We don't talk to the entity in the woods. We don't answer. Because some things, once they've noticed you, they never forget. They never let go. So there it is. My warning, my plea. Take it for what it's worth. And hey, if you've got a story like this, or know someone who does, let's hear it. Share it in the comments below. Maybe together we can find some strength, some understanding in the shared darkness. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, not all who wander are lost, but some are hunted.